2023's great games were overshadowed by a dark cloud of layoffs. Over 9,000 people are without jobs in one of the worst years for video game employment. This is the last article I have for the day. It sucks having to read about this every single day. If anybody has anything to add, let me know in chat, and we'll address whatever comes up before we move on to playing games for the rest of the day. But back to this, it's I hate to end the news segment on something so kind of dark and daunting, but it is appropriate too. The industry's been just brutally savage this year to employees, and as I was talking about before with Mick Splash this morning in chat, it's so rough to deal with, because I think that most of these companies aren't having any kind of, especially the large ones. You look at how many people have been fired from companies like Microsoft and Epic and Embracer and companies like that. The list goes on and on and on. Obviously there are going to be some companies that smaller companies that have just not been successful enough, that have shut down. People have lost their jobs, and that's something that happens in any industry. But here in the gaming industry, for sure, there have been big companies that I think have made poor business decisions, and the people that have made those poor business decisions that sit at the top are still doing just fine, and the people that have paid the price are the employees that have really gotten those companies to where they're at. It feels terrible. And it's something that we have to discuss literally almost every single day when we do the news. Every single day we do video gaming news, we have to talk about how many people have been laid off. And we're just in the video gaming industry alone. The tech industry also has just been throttled this year, but the gaming industry alone, we just see more and more people every day getting laid off, and there's no transparency behind it. Hardly ever. Hardly ever is there transparency. We never get any kind of what has the company done to try and circumvent having to lay off people. Is anybody at the top not getting bonuses? Anybody at the top taking maybe a bit of a salary cut to try and save their people? You never see any of that, and so the only thing I think that you can assume is that a lot of these companies just don't give a hot crap, dude, about their employees. That's the way it comes off. It feels terrible. Yeah. So 2023's great games were overshadowed by a dark cloud of layoffs. Over 9,000 people are without jobs in one of the worst years for video game employment. God. Layoffs are an unfortunate reality of any industry, but the scope and scale of video game layoffs this year are far beyond a typical year. More than any specific video game or piece of news, layoffs define the past 12 months. Companies large and small have felt their impact. Unofficial figures estimate 9,000 workers have been affected, and at the heart of it all are corporations that valued growth at all costs, including people. In September, Epic Games laid off 830 employees, and a statement CEO Tim Sweeney, who is worth billions, wrote, "We've been spending way more money than we earn. I had long been optimistic that we could power through the transition without layoffs, but in retrospect, I see that this was unrealistic. Some of that spending was on companies like Super Awesome and Bandcamp, which Epic bought in 2021 and 2022 respectively. Both companies were sold off shortly after Epic announced layoffs. Poor business decisions, and who pays the price? Epic makes Fortnite, a multi-billion-dollar revenue generator it licenses for Unreal Engine. software that many developers use to make games, including Final Fantasy VII Remake, Lies of P, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. It has its own unprofitable gaming storefront, and Epic still spent so much of that money that in order to maintain a level of profitability acceptable to investors, it had to let 830 people go. Over the last 2 years, Embracer Group, oh god, this is one of the, if not the worst this year. Embracer is just disgusting. Has made headlines for its numerous purchases of gaming studios, media companies, and the IP rights to The Lord of the Rings. This year, the company made an immediate about-face and began a massive restructuring program because of a $2 billion investment deal that fell through. Axios reported the deal was with Savvy Games Group, the gaming arm of the Saudi government's public investment fund. This is the public divestment group that is being used. Savvy Games Group is literally the Saudi Arabian regime investing their money into the gaming industry to try and get solely out of oil. In the aftermath of this failed investment strategy, Embracer has shuttered 3 studios, is looking to sell others, canceled numerous projects, and has laid off over 900 employees. These are just the biggest, most egregious examples. Hasbro laid off 1,000 employees, including most of the team that worked on Baldur's Gate 3 with Larian Studios. EA laid off 6% of its workforce, or around 780 people. BioWare, Microsoft, Bungie, Naughty Dog, Ubisoft, Amazon, CD Projekt Red, Sega, Unity, and Activision Blizzard were all hit, just to name a few. And in the face of these devastating layoffs, the ramifications of which we have yet to see, one of the industry's biggest, most watched events failed to even acknowledge this reality. You know what they're talking about? The Game Awards, which I also talked about earlier with MixSplash. Yep. It doesn't have to be like this. In 2013, Nintendo executives famously took a pay cut after the Wii U's poor sales to prevent laying off developers. This is the way. This is the way. I bag on Nintendo. I bag on Nintendo because as a whole, I feel that console manufacturers like Nintendo and Sony and Xbox, they are a scummier section of gaming. They take advantage of their consumers. I'm not a fan of it. I have traditionally played across all platforms, console, PC, everything. But I will shout out a company whenever they do something that is right. And back then, we're talking a decade ago, Nintendo did the right thing. And this is what I've been talking about. Like I prefaced this article with, this is not something you see anymore. You don't see this. Nobody's being transparent with what's going on. Nobody's going, look, we screwed up. The people at the top made some bad business choices. And so the people at the top are going to pay a bit of a price. Maybe not, have quite as much, luxury in their lives as they normally would, so that we can support the foundation of our companies, being the employees, the people who put in the time and they work to actually get us to where we are and have always been the basic foundation, the real substance of what our company is, right? You don't see this anymore, man. You don't see this. And so the only thing you can assume is that nobody cares about their employees. What else can you take away? All they give a crap about is living, their upper management, their board, their CEOs, all that are living a life of luxury, and they are looking at their employees as expendable. Quote, if we reduce the number of employees for better short-term financial results, employee morale will decrease. Instead, this was a quote from Nintendo when they did this back in 2013. Said then Nintendo president Satoru Iwata in an investor relations Q&A. Quote, I sincerely doubt employees who fear that they may be laid off will be able to develop software titles that could impress people around the world. Yep. This wasn't the only time either. 2 years prior, in 2011, Iwata and Nintendo's board took pay cuts after sluggish sales of the 3DS prompted Nintendo to slash the handheld's price. Nintendo developer of some of the highest quality video games ever made is saying here, in the long run, it is far more important to prioritize people over profit because those people will be better incentivized to make good games. What a notion. As of September, Tears of the Kingdom has sold 19 million copies, more than half of what Breath of the Wild has done in the 6 years since its launch. That success, the kind that had game developers, journalists, and players losing their minds over the game's bridge physics, is in part because the development teams between the two games remained largely the same. Retention is how institutional knowledge is preserved and passed down. It's the best way for developers to get promoted and making space for new people to enter the industry. Unionization can also protect developers in the event of layoffs. The effort to unionize studios continued this year, with some developers at Sega, CDPR, Avalanche Studios, and ZeniMax all voting to form unions this year. None of this is to say that layoffs should ever happen. But the scale that we've seen in 2023 certainly shouldn't. That's exactly what I've been getting at too. This is not a situation that we're dealing with in the industry where it's been like a progress review. Yeah, Mixed Splash. This is not a situation where well, I don't think it's as much Pretendo taking a stand trying to fill in for Nintendo because they care about Nintendo as much as they care about the community of gamers that still want to play on those platforms. You know what I mean? I think that's more what it is. But I digress. You know, every company should have a very, very good performance review process for their employees. If you're not performing your job, if you're not carrying your weight in your career and doing right by the company that is paying you to do your job, you don't deserve to continue to work there, right? That's the way it goes. If you're not a high quality, if you're not meeting the standards and the expectations set forth by you, by the company, and those should be very clear for you, by the way, also. You know, the company has a job of setting standards and expectations for you. And if you're not meeting those standards and expectations, you have to expect to be let go. But that's not what we're talking about here, right? This is not the situation. We understand that in any industry, there's going to be an amount of that kind of stuff that happens. Trimming the fat, if you will. You know, getting rid of the people that aren't holding their own. They're not, taking care of the things that they're supposed to be taking care of as far as what they've been employed to do. That's not what this is, though. We don't know what steps, if any, the executives of these companies with millions of dollars in compensation packages took to avoid or lessen the need for layoffs. Those kinds of mitigation actions like salary cuts and bonus cancellations should be prioritized before people are let go. The refrain of 2023 in games has been, quote, great year for games, terrible for game developers. I'd argue to just completely excise the first part of that statement. A year that is terrible for game developers cannot be great for games. It's undeniable, though. I think that you have to look at it this way as well. I understand where they're coming from here. It's a year that's terrible for game developers cannot be great for games. Agreed. But it's important to take a look at what's being done here. And I talked about this earlier as well, right? We're talking about a year with game releases. We haven't probably seen a year like this in the past 2 decades. The past 20 years, we probably haven't seen a year of game releases like we've seen in this calendar year of 2023. The amount of consensus reviewed games from critics and users to be in the 90s, let alone the high 80s, is phenomenal. It's incredible. Hopefully, it's a good sign of what's to come. I'm not expecting us to have year-on-end continuation of what we've seen this year, but I think that it puts you have to look at it like that to put things into perspective. How are we having so many banger games, fantastic, amazing games, and so many layoffs? You know, so many people that helped create these amazing titles now are jobless. You have to look at it like that as well. And I'll throw it's something else I talked about earlier when we found this kind of article. McSplash and myself were talking about this. You know, we just found out here recently that Sony is pressuring or has pressured Insomniac to fire people, to fire employees. Insomniac being one of, if not the best first party, and I'll say one of, because I don't know that they stand above like somebody like Santa Monica Studios, but one of the best first party studios under Sony and PlayStation. You know, we just found out that Sony is pressuring them, or has pressured them, to fire employees as well. I think it's already happened. And then we find out right after that, Sony has publicly announced that PlayStation is having another record-breaking year. Sony PlayStation is having another record-breaking year, and they are pressuring one of their best first-party studios to fire people. Quite possibly, Ferret. Quite possibly. I mean, it doesn't compute, dude. It doesn't make sense. It's a terrible thing to watch. I've talked about it over and over and over because the entire year, you know, and we do video gaming news segment every single day that I'm live and streaming. We always start off with this before we play games all day long. And I literally, about 80% of the news segments have been riddled with talk of this, new layoffs. You know what I mean? And it's unavoidable, and it's appropriate that we end. This is the final news segment for us of 2023, and it's appropriate that we end it on this kind of article. It wasn't planned, and I didn't plan it this way. It just, and this is a very well written article by Ash Parrish. Thank you. That's a great. Let's just give credit where credit is due here. This is a fantastic article, and it's the same kind of sentiments that I've been trying to elaborate on for the majority of this year. And so many other people in the industry have been trying to, you know, bring attention to and awareness to. It's disgusting. It feels terrible. And as I tend to do all the time, because we address this same issue all the time, you know, for all the people that have lost their jobs, obviously, we're talking about this specifically because we've come across it in the video gaming industry. But anybody, I don't care what industry you work in, if you're dealing with job loss, it's a terribly, brutal thing to deal with. It's horrible for mental health. And, I just hope that anybody that's dealing with job loss right now, you find something soon that is a better fit than what you had previously. It is more fulfilling. And the grass is greener on that front for you on whatever comes next, okay? It's terrible to see, and good Lord, I hope that 2024 is a better year all the way around on this front than 2023 was, because it's been a brutal look. It's been hard to see. It's been a very daunting thing to have to read every single day almost in the news. Just terrible, man.